Alrighty, Voidpiercer is here, so let's go ahead and take a look at her kits, skill sets, team comps, and rotations. Before we start, let me just remind you guys to migrate your Tower of Fantasy account to a Perfect World Games account before the end of February, or else your account will get deleted and you won't be able to log into the game. You can find the announcement about this in-game, and I have a step-by-step guide for it which I will link down on the video description. Okay, for starters, Voidpiercer's element is originally altered, but she has a unique weapon passive, where the weapon adapts to the element of your two other equipped weapons. Basically, as long as your other weapons have the same element, then Star of Oblivion will try to blend in and copy that very same element. For example, I have Asurada and GU equipped right now, and both of them are flame weapons, so Voidpiercer is also flame. However, if we switch to a Frost comp, as you can see, it starts from altered, then turns into Frost. Same thing applies to the other elements. In the event that you pair her with two different elements, Voidpiercer just returns to her default element, which is altered. This really limits the number of team comps that you can build with Voidpiercer, because if you pair her with the other altered characters, aside from Nola, then Voidpiercer will become altered, and you won't be able to benefit from the specific elemental buff that you want. Now, let's take a look at her skill sets. Normally, these are Voidpiercer's attack patterns, which appears to be a little bit lackluster for a new altered character. But don't worry, because they turn into a different set of attacks once this thing called Boundary Zone is active. To do that, we're gonna head over to the weapon skills. At number 1, we have Starfall Cleave. Tap the skill button to leap forward, summoning Star of Oblivion blades that pierce the ground, dealing a certain amount of damage to enemies in range. In addition, this also grants Dark Star with effects based on Star of Oblivion's current element. Out of the 5 elements, 2 of them favors Voidpiercer main DPS, while the other 3 leans more on using her as an off-field buffer. Of course, we will be covering these effects and how to utilize them, but we'll be doing that on separate videos dedicated to each specific element. For now, let's move on to Void Pursuit, which is the second active skill on the list. Tap and hold skill to create a boundary zone after a brief charge, slowing all enemies within the zone. While the boundary zone is active, switching to Star of Oblivion allows using Void Annihilation or the discharge without charge cost. This deals a certain amount of damage while also gaining Dark Star effect for your current element. Furthermore, as I've stated earlier, once Boundary Zone is active, Voidpiercer's attack sets will change entirely. Void Shredder, which is the normal attack chain, will turn into Echo of Infinity, and Reckoning of Shadow, which is the aerial attack chain, will also be replaced with Silent End. Likewise, Dodge Attack Shattering Lip will become Echo of Emptiness, launching missiles to deal a certain amount of damage, marking locked on targets with Pursuit Prey status. When a Pursuit Prey target is present, use normal attack to trigger Pursuit, diving near the target, and from there you can continue the normal attack chain. By the way, casting the Void Pursuit skill also marks hit targets for Pursuit, so you can also trigger the diving attack after holding the skill button. Basically, the general combo for Voidpiercer main DPS is Discharge into Void Pursuit or the hold skill, then immediately tap normal attack to dive near your target, proceed with the normal attack chain, and then do a dash attack at the end to prepare for the next cycle. Repeat this process 1 or 2 more times depending on your team composition. Okay, before we go on to the third active skill, let's talk about the discharge first. Void Annihilation transforms you into Voidpiercer and unleashes a gigantic black hole, inflicting slow and damage to targets in the area. Using Void Annihilation will terminate the boundary zone effect, but no worries about that, since you'll be creating a new boundary zone right after Void Annihilation, since it's possible to use skills or dashes to disengage from the discharge. This means that there's no need to jump cancel, because Voidpiercer can just complete casting the discharge for you. Alright, let's move on to the third active skill I just mentioned earlier, and that is Obliteration Blade. After 10 seconds in Boundary Zone or completing the final strike of Echo of Infinity, the skill is replaced with Obliteration Blade. This summons Voidpiercer to strike a singularity, dealing damage to enemies in her path, immediately ending the Boundary Zone. It deals a decent amount of damage, but it's not something worth casting since it takes a good amount of time with little return in terms of damage. You'll be better off doing a normal combo with Echo of Infinity and Echo of Emptiness. Last and not least is Divine Arrival, which is Voidpiercer's fourth active skill. Now this one is more of a QOL since it can teleport you straight above any world boss that you've already beaten before. For fast access, just equip Voidpiercer's weapon, open your map, click on world bosses, and choose any boss that you'd like to teleport to. Press go and then click on Divine Arrival right next to the team button. Remember that you must have beaten the boss at least once or else the teleport won't work. Next, let's talk about advancements. A1 is your generic damage bump, but take note that it will only buff Frost and Physical because these are the elements where we use Voidpiercer as the main DPS. Flame, Volt, and Altered Voidpiercer is an off-field buffer, so this advancement won't affect these elements at all. A3, on the other hand, will equally buff all elements due to the Ignore Resistance effect. Just a friendly reminder that you won't be able to check this effect on the cactus, so if you ever want to test the improvement from A1 to A3, then make sure to use the right testing environment, which is actual combat in this case. There's also this effect stating that upon entering combat state, switching to Star of Oblivion for the first time allows using the discharge without any charge cost. This is quite useful for instances where it's not possible to pre-stack discharges. For the record, there's also one team comp where A3 Voidpiercer is highly recommended because you technically need 3 pre-stack discharges. Can you guys guess which element this team comp is from? That's right, it's Volt. It's always Volt. The team comp that I'm referring to is Voidpiercer, Ray, and Meryl Ironheart, because these are all weapons where you want to use discharge right off the bat. Anyways, bare minimum damage being locked behind higher advancement is just business as usual for Volt. Still pretty decent at high investment, but it really sucks ass at low investment. Moving on, because we're getting off track here, we have A5, which grants us great sustain with its shields, and any excess will be converted to equivalent healing. Finally, A6, and as usual, this is where we get the biggest damage boost. We have increased final and elemental damage, which also works in the off-hand slot. Likewise, the matrices are just generic damage boosts on both 2-piece and 4-piece set, so there's really nothing much to talk about here. Now for some recommendations regarding to pulling. If you're free to play and is a Volt, Flame, or Altered main, then A0 4-piece or even just A0 is good enough if you want to pull for Voidpiercer. If you're Physical or Frost, then A1 offers a little damage increase, but honestly, you're better off getting the 4-piece matrices instead. Sticking to A0 4-piece is generally better and is also very cost effective. For the spenders, A3 plus 4-piece is a good benchmark, especially if you're replacing an A6 character with Voidpiercer. You get the recolored skin, which looks pretty nice if you ask me, and you also unlock some interactions on the dorm if you're into that. As for the question that's always being asked, which is better, A3 or A1 4-piece? To which I always answer with A1 4-piece, because not only is it cheaper to acquire, it's also better in general. On the other hand, Whales will A6 4-piece without a doubt, so there's nothing more to say there. Then we have Voidpiercer's Simulacrum trait. I mean, it's not a bad trait, but for most elements, there are better options, so it won't be used that much unless you're running altered comp or there's really just no other choice. Alright, since this is technically a guide for Frost Voidpiercer, we will now proceed to covering the Darkstar effect for Frost. Darkstar, Frozen. With Frost Vault stack, this boosts Star of Oblivion's final damage by a whopping 55% for 25 seconds. It also restores 10% max HP after each pursuit. When Star of Oblivion is in the off-hand slot, deal a certain amount of frost damage per second to nearby targets. The cooldown is 25 seconds and is not affected by other cooldown clearing, resetting, or changing effects. Basically, this offers a huge on-field buff, a decent amount of healing, and also a little bit of damage over time when the weapon is off-field. This 55% final damage boost just screams main DPS energy, so it's mainly the reason why Voidpiercer is a main DPS for Frost. Although there's also the DOT when you swap to other weapons, so technically you can still go with either Roslyn or Grayfox main DPS if you prefer using them. Okay, I think we've covered pretty much everything we need to know about Voidpiercer's kits. So let's move on to team comps and rotations.
I thought we could be here forever. Now it seems that we're lost in a memory. I've been waiting for excuses. I don't really wanna lose this. Been lying to myself. Girl, you know that I've been through this. Waves of crashing, scars and bruises. I don't think that I can do this. I don't think that I can do this. When these waves come crashing down and my feet won't reach the ground. When the waves come crashing down. When these waves come crashing down and my feet won't reach the ground. When these waves come crashing down. When these waves come crashing down.
I look for answers, I ain't finding loads. You know I gave it all my life and soul. We drifted off and still it's left me with these giant holes. Nothing to fill the gap and all I feel is highs and lows. I pour and drink and sit and wonder why we rival lows. See, I wasn't man enough to leave, you gave the final blows. There's many fish out on the sea, I guess what I suppose. I think it's time I let it go.
Come crashing down and my feet won't reach the ground. When the waves come crashing down. When these waves come crashing down.
全力解决。全力解决。看好了，暗示。胜负已决。全力解决。别挡路，看好了。胜负已决。